we talk about trust so much that it has almost become a buzzword, which we cannot actually let happen. As we learn about how to build true trust, we transform our businesses and our relationships. But more than that, as we develop the art of trust, we can transform lives, teams, and organizations, and perhaps even, yes, the world. Today, we're going to step back from the buzzwords and dive into the power of trust. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping organizations and their leaders grow and lead more effectively to make a bigger difference across their teams, communities, and the world. If this is you, if you want to lead better and help the leaders in your organization do the same, please accept my gift of an action guide based on the key lessons I learned from my shows during 2025. And you can get that action guide for free just by going to remarkablepodcast.com/action guide, all one word, action guide. If you were listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live because these happen live. Today's episode happened almost exactly 2 months earlier than when it released on the podcast. So if you would join us live, you get the information sooner. You get a further jump on being a more effective leader, making a more remarkable difference. So if you want to know how to do that, two of the platforms that we live stream on are LinkedIn and Facebook, and we have groups for both of those places where you can get all the inside scoop. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get clued in. Love to have you do that and all that. So that's our hope for you today, that you will join us as I welcome in my guests. I'm going to bring them in now. There they are. Dennis and Michelle Reina. Dr. Dennis Reina and Dr. Michelle Reina are internationally recognized pioneers in the field of organizational trust and best-selling authors of the groundbreaking Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace. As co-founders of Reina Trust Building, they have devoted their lives to understanding, measuring, and strengthening trust in the workplace. More than 3 decades of research and practice have culminated in their new book, The Art of Trust Building, and its digital companion, the Reina Trust Assessment. They'll tell you all about that later. I'm so glad to have them to join me today. Michelle and Dennis, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I told you guys before, it's a good thing that you like each other because you had to get squished together to be on the camera together. And you're also not the first married couple that have been guests of mine at the same time. So anyway, I don't know what that means to anyone except Kevin. Let's dive in. And I want to talk about the book, obviously. I want to talk about your work for sure. But I really want to start with why this book. Dennis, why this book?
Well, the world of work these days is so much different and has changed so much, even in the last few years, with remote work as well as, geographically dispersed, as well as the changing landscape, the technology, AI, etc. There's so much disruption going on in the world and in the world of work that we said we needed to write this book. The importance of trust is recognized, but how to practice it each and every day, because it is truly a daily practice. That's where this book comes into play.
One of the things that you wrote in the book is that trust is a way of being, not a destination. What I tell people all the time is that in the dictionary, trust is both a noun and a verb. But the more of the verb we do, the more of the noun we get. You're nodding, so I guess I'm not completely off base with that. So I'm right with you on that. And I want to get to that word art in a second, which is the second word in the title. But Michelle, what is the big idea of the book? Dennis told us sort of why you felt that you needed to share this with the world. What's the big idea?
We all need trust, Kevin. We all want trust. We fundamentally believe we all deserve it, but it starts with one place and one place only, and that's each and every one of us. The value we place on trust is just the starting point. What brings it to life in our relationships is the way we show up and behave. That's a little bit of an aspect of the art because we all have control over how we choose to behave, and it's our behavior that's backed up with our attitude and our outlook that actually makes trust. What we use as the phraseology, Kevin, is trust building. We don't build trust. We are in the art of trust building. We're always working at it. It's always at play. And it's the art of trust building that brings it into our lives in a way that is sustainable.
Would it be safe to say that, I mean, you just said it, we are always in the process of trust building, but we're not all doing it intentionally. I mean, the part of this
Mhm.
point of this conversation is to do it more intentionally. But is it safe to say that we're all doing it, whether we know it or not, however unsuccessfully or successfully?
I'd say yes and no. I'd say that there are ways that we are naturally inclined to be building trust because as human beings, we want connection. We all want to connect with others. We all want to be trusted by others and to be trusted in return. Yet, today, in this changing landscape, we are most vulnerable to trip up. And there are small, subtle little ways that our behavior may actually cause trust to break down. Not only do we not intend that to happen, we're not even aware that it is happening.
Which was kind of what I was saying. Like, we're doing stuff all the time, whether it's building or breaking, it's happening all the time. And our point today is, how do we be more intentional about it, and how do we apply the art, as Michelle and Dennis are talking. So Dennis, the book is really based around three dimensions of trust, and we'll dive into them. But why don't we start by you just telling us what they are at a high level, and then we can dive into them a little bit more.
Sure. So, what we have found from our 35 years of research and practice in this field, Kevin, is that trust is actually three dimensions. That's trust of character. We do what we say we're going to do. And then there's trust of communication. We openly, honestly, and transparently speak with one another. And then the third is trust of capability. We acknowledge and leverage the skills of one another in service to our customers, our clients, or those we are charged to serve.
One of the things, and I love these, is the three C's, as character, communication, and capability. And in my observation, in uh, working with leaders for as long as you guys have been studying trust, you can't have a conversation very long where it doesn't show up, even if they don't use that word. And one of my observations is that many people tend to only frame trust, especially if they feel like it's broken with someone, in
Right.
only one of those three dimensions.
Right.
So thoughts, you're nodding. Thoughts about that, Michelle? Is that an accurate way? And does that line up with your research?
Yeah, yes, it does in actually two ways, Kevin. And I'm fascinated by the question. In the very early stages of our research, I'm going back many, many, many years ago.
We don't
Many.
have to talk
When we
about
were
that part.
5 years old.
I was like 5 at the time,
We don't have to
Kevin.
talk about that part, guys.
We all learn from our clients, right? And in the earlier stages of our research, Dennis and I would sit down and have dialogue with leaders, and we'd ask them to share with us stories and examples of what fostered trust in their relationships, and they would actually reply with stories of what caused trust to break down. The key is that yes, we may have a bit more of a propensity. We may tend to focus our behavior. We may not be fully aware of it, but we may be more inclined to hone in on trust of character, particularly during times of change and transition when expectations are up for grabs and people are looking for some clarity about how they're going to really work together and align around goals and objectives. It's the thing that's really important, that we'd like the listening audience to understand is that while we may focus on one particular dimension of trust and the behaviors that build that dimension, we're also supporting and enabling trust to be fostered in those other dimensions because they really work
Hand
hand
in
in
hand.
hand. Because as human beings in our behavior, there's systems that are at play and synergistically, we're raising the bar all the way around.
So Dennis, let's talk about I want to talk about the character one first, and here's why. First of all, it's the first one of the three, but the other reason I want to talk about it is I wrote a book last year called Flexible Leadership, and so I spent a lot of time helping people see the difference between, yes, it's useful to be flexible, and it's useful to be consistent, right? Being reliable and helping people understand the tension between those two things. And yet, all of us, as you said it, Dennis said, that trust of character is people doing what they say they're going to do. Right. That
Absolutely.
reliability piece. So talk more about, like, at work, what does that one look like? What can it look like?
Sure. So usually it starts with expectations. So often we see that trust is actually broken because of unclear expectations, or expectations wasn't met, needs weren't being met. And so clearly and explicitly clarifying your expectations is absolutely critical. And through that,
100%. I'm sorry, I have to stop you. Like, that's a soapbox I could live on a long time, because in working with leaders for a very long time, everybody, I can tell you that leaders at every level, as long as they've been doing it, still struggle with this. It is not in people's job descriptions to read your mind. It's just not. So I'm sorry I interrupted, but it's such an important, it's such a foundational and important point.
absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, alongside that is establishing boundaries, which really means how it plays out in the workplace is what what's the clarity around the roles and responsibilities of my job, particularly the way the landscape is shifting and changing. And that is shifting and changing. So how does that evolve? Yes, it's important to be flexible, but what are the core components, or what are the core tenets of the responsibilities that I have? And then, of course, how we delegate. And delegate isn't just about dumping it off your plate. It's really about empowering others to learn and grow in their jobs, because you're empowering them to take the role and the responsibility. I mean, ultimately, the buck falls with us as leaders, but how do we empower them to learn and grow in their jobs and their responsibilities? And then, of course, another one is, and this is so foundational to trust of character, keeping agreements, delivering as promised, keeping our word, etc. And how we do that. And then, of course, the whole notion around predictability, consistency. Trust is built by those small moments consistently over time.
So, Michelle, a lot of people, when they think about trust, they think, well, I want people to be honest. I want people to be transparent, which is what you guys call trust of communication. So talk about that dimension a little more, and frame it for us around the workplace.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are those core behaviors. Information is king, Kevin. We know that in our shared work together, is particularly today when life is moving so fast, the transparency of information, as much as in the moment as is possible. People have a need for the information at hand that helps them work with fluidity. And we know that when they don't have it, it tends to get made up. And information is so critical to what you and Dennis were just sort of bantering about a little bit, which is around managing expectations. A key aspect of transparency is what we call telling the truth. And that requires some real openness and a real environment of safety, because there's telling the truth about the status of projects. There's telling the truth about how confident I feel. There's telling the truth about thoughts and recommendations and feelings and thoughts and concerns. And every now and then, we might tend to hold back what is the truth, or we might tend to spin that truth and provide a comfortable variation of that truth as a way of helping us to look good, helping us to be accepted, to make sure we're in good standing. Yet the tricky part is that really goes unnoticed. So it's where trust becomes vulnerable. There's going to be issues and concerns in all relationships. It's going to happen. There are going to be issues and concerns about what's happening in the world around us, inside of us. They're going to happen. Speaking with good purpose, with positive intent to get things on the table and let's work them through together rather than fueling the rumor mill and
The grapevine.
feeding the grapevine and contributing to gossip and conjecturing, which just breaks trust but creates an enormous amount of distraction. And of course, feedback is so important in the spirit of helping others learn and grow. So it's how we show up, how we behave, how we speak with one another in service to one another are some really key underpinnings to trust of communication. It's where we connect more deeply on a human level.
And the third is trust of capability. And one of the things, or you know, do I trust the other person's skills and abilities? And one of the things that I noticed, and we talked with clients a lot with during the pandemic and beyond, as we've talked with people about who are no longer working side by side, in many cases, is that this one is sometimes hard to build because we could see some of those things more clearly, and not just in jobs where we're watching people do the work, but just in general, we sometimes could build that easier together, physically together, in proximity than we can at distance. So, Dennis, anything you want to say about that third one? I think we all probably have a pretty good picture of what that one is, but any specifics about that in the world today that you'd want to comment on?
Well, obviously, the trust of capability, which is our third leg of the stool, if you will. Um, it is about acknowledging people's skills and ability, but it also it's about helping them learn and grow into those skills and empowering them to make decisions or at least involving them, gaining and gathering and seeking their input, so we can make the best decision given the changing landscape, given the the floor right now is like quicksand because it's so uneasy and undiscernible, and we have to be constantly flexing and changing and growing.
Kevin, can I jump in real quick on
Please,
this?
please.
I want to go back to the whole notion of skills and abilities, acknowledging those, because so often people associate that with the tangible, concrete skills and abilities that we can actually see. The art of trust building actually is a skill and an ability. And so sometimes there are intangible skills and abilities that we all foster, that helps us actually in our behavior, the ways that we're aware of assumptions that we might be making, in how we test those assumptions, ways we may be forming judgments, and how we shift from judgment to understanding, ways that we might become critical and assume the worst, and we pivot into a place of compassion. Those are all skills and abilities that are not necessarily um, evident on the surface level in a concrete, tangible way. The whole facet of trust building are skills and abilities.
Yeah, I love that, and I want to go back to something Dennis said at the start of the conversation about capability, and that is not just where people are today, or only with a backward lens, but
Mhm.
where we believe they can get. Because if we
Yes,
only look backward, then we're never giving anyone the chance. We're not we're not considering our trust in their potential as opposed to just our trust in what we've seen up until this very instant, right? And I think all of us would say that if the people that helped us grow and succeed only looked in the rearview mirror, we might not be in the spots that we're in today.
absolutely, absolutely.
So you guys have built an assessment around these three dimensions. I took the assessment, by the way, but tell people about how because hopefully at this point they're interested in understanding this better and thinking about this in terms of them building the art of trust building for themselves around these three dimensions. Tell us a little bit more about that, how they can take advantage of that.
Well, the assessment is rooted in a suite of assessments that we've had over the years, Kevin, that assesses trust and leadership and team relationships. And we've seen the value that they've provided to leaders and teams for many years around the world. And we wanted to bring that into the readers to give them a starting point. So the book does talk about the three dimensions of trust, and the way that we've all had a chance to dialogue around it here. And that gives language and vocabulary and behavior.
Right.
The assessment gives each person a vehicle to actually check in and into how they actually see themselves practicing those behaviors. Their profile of their own trustworthiness helps them to know where trust stands right now and how they see their own behavior, and gives them a place where they can go and focus, to continue to grow and develop, help them tune into a behavior or two that they feel if they move the needle on that, it's going to strengthen trust all the way around.
I'd like to add to that, and what participants get is a very robust feedback report that really helps them not only understand those three dimensions, but also coaching tips on where they see themselves and where they would like to go with the practice of those, or the art of trust building.
Yeah, I love that. And so you can learn more about that by getting a copy of their book, The Art of Trust Building, Transform Lives, Teams, and Organizations. I'm going to get to that last word, organizations. So when we have a conversation about trust, and certainly this conversation has been largely about thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we can build trust with those around us. And we've talked about how that's useful for the organization, but I want us to spend the last couple minutes of our time talking about this from the organizational perspective. Like, if I'm listening to this conversation and I'm saying, Dennis and Michelle, I love this for me, but I want to think about this for our organization, what is some advice that you would have for us to work on building organizational trust? What can organizations be doing to help everyone build these skills? Either one of you want to take that?
Sure, I'll jump in. It begins with, obviously each and every person, but from an organizational perspective, I love that question, Kevin. Um, there's a facet that we find is extremely important for leaders to be aware of. So first, there's a fundamental leader need that leaders have for there to be a high level of trust within the organization, because all business is actually conducted through relationships. That's the bottom line. It's people working hand in hand with one another. Those individual relationships, team relationships, working across teams, across the enterprise. It's those relationships that are absolutely necessary for people to do their work and produce the best results for the organization. So there's the business need for results. There's the business need right now for agility and flexibility and speed to market, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always that human need for connection. And where do people tend to look? They tend to look to their leaders. Their leaders set the tone. Their leaders give the cues. It's where people tend to go. Our message in the book is that while people may tend to kind of sit back and wait and wonder and watch how their leaders are going to show up, the truth is nobody needs to wait. Everybody can take a step, yet leaders do model and set the tone. Do they have 100% responsibility? No, but they do have responsibility to help their people grow in trust. They do have that responsibility to model and to demonstrate and to help their own people acquire the skills and the tools and the working framework so that they can not just talk about trust and relationships, they can actually go to work and building it and enabling it and sustaining it. Because, the truth is that leaders do not need a high trust environment for today. They need it for today and tomorrow. It's the long tail that's so essential for sustainability.
Dennis, before we start to wrap up, I'm curious if there's something that you wish I would have asked or that you would like for us to have talked about that we didn't.
Well, I just want to underscore what Michelle said, is that, with trust, it's an invisible energy force. okay, that when it's present, nobody notices it. But when it's absent, everybody notices it
And feels it.
and feels it. It's kind of like oxygen, you know, we breathe.
We're going to
And,
notice it if we don't have it. I promise you
and
that.
exactly, exactly. And that's when trust becomes, something that leaders pay attention. But what they need to do is pay attention each and every day, but with those small moments and those small interactions and those small engagements on how they show up, how they behave, how they follow through, and this is not just for leaders, this is for everybody, in the organization, because trust is everyone's responsibility. And I also just want to underscore that trust becomes that bridge between that business need for results and that human need for connection.
Awesome. Uh, Michelle, you knew I was going to ask you this question. So here it comes. And you even took a minute to make sure you got it right so you could give me the answer. What are you reading these days?
There is a book that I'm reading that I'm actually rereading it. It's called The Untethered Soul, and it's written by Michael Singer. And why I love this book, and return to it every now and again, is it really helps us to more fully understand the relationship that we have with ourselves. Because the relationships we have with other people, Kevin, begins with the relationship we have with ourselves. One thing we didn't talk heavily about today that's a key aspect is that trust can be innately vulnerable. So, what's fundamental to the sustaining of it is compassion. And this book really gives insight into how we can bring compassion to ourselves. And it's through bringing it to ourselves we can extend that to other people. And that's what I love about Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Journey,
All right.
or The Untethered Soul. I
Soul,
apologize.
that's what I wrote down. I was going to have to go figure that out for myself. The Untethered Soul, will have that in the show notes, as we always do. Dennis, same question for you. What are you reading these days?
Well, I'm reading Eat, Move, and Sleep by Tom Rath. And it's really about the quality of our lives. We may or may not live longer, but what is the quality of our lives that we live? But it is, and if we practice, eating well and getting enough sleep, and then, of course, moving each and every day, we will actually live a longer, healthier, more better life.
Eat, Move, Sleep by Tom Rath. We've also got, we will also have in the show notes, obviously, The Art of Trust Building by Dennis and Michelle Reina. And so, Dennis, where can people go to get that assessment? Where do you want to point people? Where can they go to learn more about you, get connected, get the book, all that stuff?
Well, they can first go to our website. That's Reina Trust Building. That's REINA. And then, of course, you know how to spell trustbuilding.com. That's Reina Trust Building. There you go.
ReinaTrustBuilding.com. You can go there. You can go to the show notes. We'll have all that stuff, all the links to connect with them, to the books we just talked about, and obviously, of course, to The Art of Trust Building as well. Before we go, and before I say goodbye to Michelle and Dennis, I want to do what I do every single episode. I'm reliable on this front, Dennis. I'm going to ask all of you the question I always ask as a listening audience. And the question is, now what? What will you do now? Because you've listened to this conversation. Maybe you were enlightened by this conversation. Maybe you got some interesting ideas from this conversation. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you take action on what you got. Until you do that, until you start to remember that trust is a way of being and not a destination, you can't build the art of trust building. So I challenge you to take action on something that you mentally highlighted, something that you put in your notes if you were taking notes, and take action, because if you don't, it won't make any difference. Michelle and Dennis, thanks for being here. It was a pleasure to have you guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Kevin.
much.
And with that, everybody, it's another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast in the books, which means while we say goodbye today, we'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you're watching or listening so you don't miss that episode. And every week, because we're back every week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.